Hi there, my name is Miranda Terwilliger. I'm a wildlife biologist here. I'm going to be talking to you about these two guys over here, elk and bison. But first I wanted to share with you this graphic because it may be new to you, but I think it's a really handy thing. We have problems with both these animals with visitors getting too close, which means that sometimes the animals get injured and sometimes the visitors do. So this is a handy dandy thing that says for these animals, keep about 2 bus lengths between you and them. If it's a squirrel, 1 bus length, or a smaller animal. So anyway, this is our kind of educational. It's supposed to be sort of intuitive if you don't speak the language, if you don't come from a culture that uses feet, etc. So keep this in mind. It's a really handy guide for your visitors. So first I'm going to talk to you a little bit about elk management on the South Rim. As you all have probably seen, we have quite a few elk here. A little bit of background about the elk here. Our elk were brought to Arizona from Montana in 1929 after the native Merriam's elk, which was a much smaller elk, were extirpated. It is not known whether or not they were at the Grand Canyon in any form. There wasn't a lot of water up here, so we don't have much evidence of it, but unknown. Needless to say, these introduced elk are Rocky Mountain elk. They're a lot bigger. They first migrated from Williams and Flagstaff and were first spotted in the park in 1966. They've grown in population since then. They've become very habituated. They love all of our human-provided water and food sources. A lot of people here don't expect to see wildlife. They think that they are let out from pens at night. They think they're maybe here for rides. They try and give them their water bottles. And as you know, sometimes they get really aggressive at specific times of the year, especially when they have young in the spring or at the rut in the fall. So this causes problems, the habituation. So we have a study going on. We had one in 2015 that estimated there's about 200 elk in the village proper. So that's from a genetic study using scat. Currently, we're collaring elk. That provides us with satellite locations, updated regularly throughout the day. We can also track them using telemetry gear with radios. Part of what we're trying to do is really understand the seasonal movement and use, and where are they concentrating, where visitors are concentrating as well. How do we use this information then to reduce human-elk conflict, elk-vehicle conflict, and write a management plan so we can do all those things. So right now we have, I think there's 7 elk that are collared. We did have a cow die last spring. And what we see is this. If you look, this is where all the elk have been. 95% of the locations are in the village proper. The lighter colors are where they spend less time. The darker ones are where they spend the most of time. 55% is spent in these red spots. So they are really not going outside of the village, which is kind of interesting, noting some previous studies here where our predators, our mountain lions and things, pretty much stay outside of this area, right? So we think that this is adaptive in many ways. One, this is where all the water sources and food sources are. This is where grass is growing artificially. This is where people feed them. There's bird seed. There's lots of water. And there's no predators. So pretty interesting to see that these 200 elk are just hanging out here. Also, clearly ups our chance for conflict, right? This is probably the animal that I'm the most concerned of on the South Rim where there being conflict with people. People get too close. And they're big animals and they can really hurt people. So whenever possible, if you see a visitor, try and engage them. I find in particular if you tell people that, you know, when I'm a mom, I don't like it when people approach my young and try and touch them or give them food. Works a lot better than, hey, get away from that elk. What the heck do you think you're doing, right? People kind of get touchy about that. So it depends on how you approach them. But I could use all of your help in keeping the elk and humans a little bit safer from each other. This also includes, I mean, I don't know if you guys seen it, but elk have tried to drink water out of hummingbird feeders. They'll go after rainwater that falls in some kid's toy. There's lots of different places. We used to have grass at the El Tovar, really bad place for elk and human to get together because the elk would be trapped between the building and the rim, and then there's people and they have nowhere to go. So then they would get really aggressive. We've removed some of those attractants, but there are still some out there. So we're trying to remove those. So that's elk. Now I'm totally going to switch gears and talk about bison on the North Rim, another large, charismatic ungulate. Background for these. These animals have been in Arizona since 1905. They were introduced by an individual who was gathering bison up at the very end of the century when there weren't very many left, and who was trying to breed them with cattle. That was conservation as we knew it then, not as we know it now. They've been in the park since the late 1900s. They wandered up from House Rock Valley, which is where they originally were. The state managed them there for many years. And now they pretty much don't leave the park boundaries, except for maybe within a mile of it on the Forest Service side, where the state does have hunting for them. So we have a lot of them, and we started realizing there were a lot of impacts to resources. And so in 2017, we wrote an environmental assessment. We cooperated with the Game and Fish, Bureau of Land Management, the Kaibab National Forest, and the Intertribal Buffalo Council in writing this EA. We also consulted with our 11 traditionally associated tribes. Our goal of this EA is a short-term goal to reduce the herd below 200 animals in 5 years. Why? Here's some of the bison impacts. Most of these are pre-bison, post-bison, pre-bison, post-bison. As you can see, they create a lot of wallows. They create some amazing trails that look better than some of the trail crew work, and they're great. These are images from space of trailing and wallows that they've created. So they are definitely having an impact. And they're also, some of these wallows are occurring on sacred sites and on archaeological sites, and they're getting destroyed. So how are we going about this? In 2019, we did our first pilot live capture. We captured 51 bison. We collared 14, same radio satellite collars that you saw in the elk are going on the bison for the same reason. Where do they go? Where do they spend their time? How do we monitor those areas for that? How does it change when there's forest fires? Things like that. We shipped 31 of them to the Quapaw tribe in Oklahoma with the assistance of the Intertribal Buffalo Council. Those were all the ones that we didn't collar, with the exception of 4 that got released because they were too small. And we gathered a whole bunch of biological data because we had them in hand. So why not? Let's get some tail hair for genetics. Let's get some blood for disease monitoring. Let's look at how much they weigh. Let's see all these other things that we kind of just want to know about the bison since we have them in hand. I wanted to share with you this too is a big part of reduction. Harvest does occur outside the boundaries. Right here is about when they stopped leaving the Kaibab Plateau. So this is from 1982 till 2018. I'm missing a few data points in there. That doesn't mean there's no hunting there, but that's why there's nothing there. So as you can see, the state has simultaneously been upping their harvest rates, trying to help reduce the population. Because we were all in agreement, all of the cooperators, that there's too many bison for the landscape up there. So where have those collars showed the bison be? This is their summer range, or where they were this year after capture. As you can see, they ranged almost everywhere. The area in blue is essentially the North Rim. This area right here is Powell. This is the Walhalla Plateau. This is the Kaibab, and this area is what's known as the House Rock Valley Wildlife Area, which is a part of the Kaibab Plateau, but was set aside separately, specifically as an important wildlife area. This is where they are in their winter range, so this is where they are right now. They're right on the edge. A lot of them go to Powell. When you zoom in on this, and I'm sorry I didn't put a zoom in, it's interesting to find out that these animals are going down as far as 6,000 feet in elevation. So keep in mind that the Grand Canyon on the North Rim is at 8,000 feet and above mostly. So they're going down pretty far and in some pretty treacherous terrain that some of us would not feel comfortable in. We have an animal that's collared over here that we haven't gotten any receivers off of since the 20th of December, but we recently flew a survey, and we were able to find him way down in a crack, and he's just not in a place where that receiver can reach the sky. So that's how steep some of these areas are that these animals are wintering in. So the other things that we're really trying to do is get a better handle on what are those effects and impacts. How big is our population so we know, are we being effective in our reduction? How many young do they have in a year? That's the population demographics. How many bulls to cows are there? How are they using the habitat? We're getting, as you can see, there's very different usage in the summer versus the winter. This area coincides very nicely with the meadows and springs that we know about. We're looking at genetics. We know that there were cattle introduced with this population 100 years ago, but how do they compare to other conservation herds across the country? We're looking at disease. As far as we know, there is no brucellosis or any other worrisome bison disease in this population, and there's no source for it. The state has monitored for this using hunter-provided data or samples. So that's a great thing. It's one less thing we have to worry about as far as movement. We can move bison pretty easily. And we're looking at the impacts on the vegetation. It looks pretty severe, right? But what does that mean for a plant? What does that actually mean for the ecology? So those are some things we're trying to get a better understanding of. So that's it. No questions now, just think about them and save them for later. And just remember this chart again. 1 bus for the small animals, 2 for the big ones. Thanks.